The charge that ended Sarah Whitmore's 23-year marriage was only $25. It was the smallest item on the hotel bill. At 2:13 in the morning, Sarah woke to the soft vibration of her phone beside the bed. A hotel confirmation had been sent to the email account she shared with her husband. Daniel was supposed to be away on a 4-day business trip. At first, nothing on the receipt looked unusual enough to frighten her. His name was there. The dates matched the trip. The room had already been charged to the family credit card. Then she read the details more carefully. 1 king-size room, 2 registered adults, breakfast for 2. Sarah stared at those lines longer than she wanted to admit. 3 years earlier, she would have called him immediately. She would have demanded an explanation before the screen had even dimmed. But she had spent 3 years teaching herself not to do that. She had been told that healing required trust. That suspicion could become its own kind of damage. That if she kept looking for betrayal, she would eventually destroy the marriage she claimed she wanted to save. So Sarah nearly closed the email. Then she saw the final charge. Portable crib rental. $25. Their daughter, Lily, was 15 years old. There was no infant in their home. No niece or nephew traveling with Daniel. No business reason for a crib to be sitting in his hotel room. 3 years earlier, Daniel had begged Sarah to forgive him for an affair. He had promised honesty, therapy, transparency, whatever it took. Sarah had given him all of it. Now, sitting alone in the dark, she began to understand something much worse than another affair. While she had been trying to rebuild their marriage, Daniel may have been using their money to build another family. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and the quiet kind of justice that begins when someone finally stops ignoring the evidence. Because the crib was not the secret. It was only the first receipt. Sarah met Daniel when they were both in their late 20s. They were not rich. They never had the kind of marriage people photographed for magazines. What they built was smaller and, for a long time, more dependable. A modest house in a safe neighborhood. 2 steady jobs. Sunday dinners at the same worn kitchen table. They saved when they could. They worried about bills when they had to. They raised a daughter and slowly created the kind of ordinary life that feels permanent because nobody notices how much work it takes to hold it together. Sarah worked full-time at a dental clinic. She was good at her job. Calm with nervous patience. Organized when the office was busy. The person everyone called when a schedule fell apart or a problem needed solving without making the whole room panic. At home, she carried that same responsibility. She kept track of Lily's school calendar. She scheduled doctor and dentist appointments. She paid the household bills. She planned visits with grandparents. She remembered activity fees, permission slips, prescription refills, birthdays, and every small deadline that could turn into a large problem if nobody handled it. Sarah did not complain often. That was part of the problem. Daniel was ambitious, polished, and easy to like. He remembered people's names. He asked the right questions. He had a way of making coworkers feel as if their ideas mattered, even when he had already decided what he wanted. When promotions came, Daniel began traveling more. Sarah agreed to take on extra responsibilities at home. She told herself it was temporary. Daniel said the travel would lead to better opportunities, better retirement savings, and more security for Lily. Sarah believed him. For years, she thought that was what partnership looked like. One person moved forward, while the other kept the ground beneath them steady. Then, 3 years before the hotel receipt, Sarah opened an email from a woman named Rebecca Lane. She had not gone looking for it. The message had been sent to an account Daniel occasionally used on the family computer. Sarah saw Rebecca's name in the preview and recognized it as someone from Daniel's company. There was no photograph of Daniel in a hotel bed. No direct confession. No single sentence he could not try to explain. That was almost worse. There were messages about how much they missed each other. private photographs that had no place between coworkers, references to conversations Sarah had never known about, and a plan to meet after an upcoming conference. It was not friendship. It was not professional. And it was not confusion, no matter how carefully Daniel tried to rename it. That was the phrase he used when Sarah confronted him. Emotional confusion. He said he had been lonely. He said work had become overwhelming. He said Rebecca understood the pressure he was under, and the relationship had crossed boundaries before he realized how far it had gone. Then he cried. Daniel was not a man who cried easily. In 20 years, Sarah had seen it only a handful of times. He apologized. He insisted the relationship had never become physical. He said he had made a terrible mistake, but not the kind of mistake that should erase an entire marriage. He promised to cut off all contact with Rebecca. He offered Sarah access to his passwords. He agreed to couples therapy before she even asked. And Sarah wanted to believe him. Lily was 12 years old then. Sarah's father had died only a few months earlier. Lily had been close to him. Every Friday, he used to pick her up from school, buy her a milkshake, and listen as if every story from 7th grade was the most important thing he had heard all week. After his death, Lily had become quieter. She left his last birthday card on her desk and refused to move it. Sarah was still grieving too, though she rarely had the privacy to do it properly. The idea of breaking apart Lily's home while she was already learning what permanent absence felt like seemed unbearable. And Daniel looked genuinely sorry. For the first few months, he did everything a remorseful husband was supposed to do. He shared his passwords without being asked twice. He cut back on travel. He checked in during the day. He came home earlier. He attended every therapy session and listened while Sarah described the humiliation of discovering that her husband had created an intimate world with another woman. He became attentive in ways she had almost forgotten he could be. So Sarah stayed. Not because she was foolish, not because she believed every explanation, and certainly not because what he had done seemed small. She stayed because 20 years of marriage could not be packed into one decision made during the worst week of her life. She stayed because Lily was grieving. Because Sarah was grieving. Because a home, a history, and a family felt too important to abandon without making one honest attempt to save them. Forgiveness, however, did not arrive the way people described it in therapy. It did not come as a clean decision followed by peace. When Daniel traveled, Sarah listened too closely to his voice. She noticed pauses before he answered simple questions. She tried to identify the sounds behind him. Restaurant noise, a hotel television, another person breathing. Then she hated herself for listening. Sometimes Daniel would ask whether she was all right, and Sarah would say yes, because she did not want another conversation about trust. Sometimes she swallowed questions before they reached her mouth. She was afraid of becoming the suspicious wife Daniel said therapy was supposed to heal. Little by little, Sarah began treating her own instincts like a character flaw. She told herself that staying was the mature choice. She told herself that forgiveness required discipline. She told herself that a woman could not demand a second chance for her marriage and then examine every shadow as if betrayal were still hiding there. For the first year, Daniel behaved like a man grateful to have his family back. By the second year, he began acting as though Sarah owed him something for staying. When she asked about a late meeting, he reminded her that they had already addressed the past. When she looked uneasy about another work trip, he said therapy only worked if she chose to move forward. When she admitted she still struggled to trust him,
Daniel told her he could not spend the rest of his life being punished for one mistake.
he had learned the language of healing. The bitter part was how easily he learned to use it against her. Words like trust, projection, emotional safety, and moving forward stopped being tools for repairing their marriage. They became ways to end conversations before Sarah received an answer. Daniel's business travel slowly returned. At first, it was one night every few months. Then two. Then entire weeks built around conferences, regional meetings, and client visits. He said the company was expanding. Sarah did not object. She was terrified that any concern would make her look controlling. Daniel usually returned with something for Lily. A sweatshirt from an airport shop. Chocolate from a hotel lobby. A souvenir from a city he barely saw. The gifts made him look thoughtful. They also kept anyone from asking too many questions about where he had been. Around the same time, Daniel began talking more often about money. He said they needed to reduce their contributions to Lily's college account. He suggested Sarah lower the amount going into her retirement fund. The roof needed repairs, but Daniel insisted they should wait because his annual bonus had been smaller than expected. Sarah accepted those explanations because she had always handled the bills, but Daniel handled the larger financial decisions. Still, certain charges began to bother her. Travel expenses were climbing. There were restaurant purchases in cities that did not match the itinerary Daniel had given her. Gas charges appeared on days he claimed to be flying. Several payments were labeled consulting services, though Daniel said they were temporary business expenses his employer would reimburse. Whenever Sarah asked, Daniel had an answer. Not always a good answer, but usually one delivered with enough confidence to make her question whether she had misunderstood the paperwork. He also continued presenting himself as a devoted father. Daniel loved Lily. Sarah never doubted that. But love and presence were not the same thing. He missed parent conferences. He canceled weekends because a client suddenly needed him. He forgot the name of Lily's new doctor and regularly called Sarah to ask what time practices, exams, and school events were scheduled. Sarah kept all of it in the family calendar, not because she expected a custody battle. She kept records because somebody had to make sure Lily's life did not collapse every time Daniel's plans changed. Then Daniel asked Sarah to sign paperwork for a home equity line of credit. He said the money would cover the roof repairs and give them breathing room. Sarah looked at the amount. It was far more than the contractor's estimate. When she asked why they needed so much, Daniel's expression changed. He accused her of falling back into the same pattern their therapist had warned about: suspicion, control, refusing to move forward. Sarah did not sign the papers that night. 2 weeks later, the hotel receipt appeared in the family email, and one $25 charge finally explained why Daniel needed access to more money. Elaine Porter read the receipt twice before she said anything. She was 59, composed, and unimpressed by dramatic promises of revenge. She had handled enough divorces to know that anger could feel powerful while making a person careless. According to Sarah's attorney, the affair itself might not decide the outcome in their state. But undisclosed income could matter. Hidden accounts could matter. And marital money spent outside the marriage could matter very much. Elaine did not tell Sarah to follow Daniel. She did not suggest searching his phone or entering accounts that did not belong to her. She told Sarah to gather only what she had a legal right to access: joint bank statements, tax returns, mortgage documents, family credit card records, insurance statements, Lily's school calendar and medical records, emails sent to the shared family account. The advice sounded almost too calm for the situation. Sarah had spent the last several days imagining confrontation, Daniel denying everything, Daniel becoming angry, Daniel telling her she had misunderstood another harmless detail. But Elaine was not interested in arguments. She was interested in records. Sarah opened a separate bank account for her future paychecks. She did not drain the joint account. She copied important household documents and stored them safely outside the home. Elaine warned her not to sign the home equity papers, take on any new debt, or alert Daniel before they understood where the money had gone. Sarah checked her credit report. Daniel had already made an inquiry for a new line of credit. The loan had not been completed. Not yet. Then Elaine found a form buried in their tax records. At the top was a business name Sarah had never seen before: Whitmore Strategic Consulting, LLC. Sarah read it several times. Daniel had always said his income came from his employer, his salary, his bonus. Nothing else. He had never mentioned a consulting company. Public records showed the LLC had been formed almost 3 years earlier, only weeks after Daniel promised Sarah that his relationship with Rebecca was over. That was the moment Sarah stopped looking at the hotel bill as an isolated betrayal. The crib charge was not a mistake. The hotel was not a single bad night. The hidden business suggested planning, a structure, a system designed to move money without Sarah understanding where it went. Sarah had spent 3 years wondering whether Daniel had changed. Now she began asking a different question. How much had he hidden while convincing her that doubt was the real problem? She filed for divorce. Once Sarah filed for divorce, the question stopped being private. Elaine requested the records Daniel had spent years keeping out of sight: business bank statements, bonus reports, expense accounts, consulting contracts, loan applications, hotel charges, rental payments, every transfer connected to Whitmore Strategic Consulting LLC. Daniel's first response was almost dismissive. He said the company barely existed. According to him, it was little more than a name he had registered for occasional consulting work. A few small projects. Nothing significant. Certainly nothing that belonged in the middle of a divorce. Elaine did not argue with him. She hired Marcus Bell, a forensic accountant who had spent years looking at numbers people hoped nobody would examine too closely. Marcus had a patient way of working. He did not make accusations. He followed dates, account numbers, and transfers until the money told its own story. It did not take long. Daniel's annual bonuses had not disappeared the way he claimed. Several had been deposited directly into the consulting account. Additional income from private contracts had never appeared in the household budget Sarah managed. Then Marcus found the recurring payments. Every month, money went to Rebecca Lane. Some transfers were labeled consulting fees. Others were marked reimbursement. A few had no description at all. The amounts changed, but the destination did not. There were payments for a 2-bedroom apartment, daycare charges, health insurance connected to a child named Noah Lane, hotel expenses that matched the dates Daniel told Sarah he was traveling for work. The farther Marcus went back, the clearer the pattern became. This had not begun with the recent hotel stay. It had been going on for years. Nearly $82,000 had left the marriage in rent, childcare, insurance, hotel rooms, children's supplies, and direct transfers. Some of it came from bonuses Daniel told Sarah he had never received. Some came from money that should have gone into Lily's college account. Sarah sat across from Marcus as he explained the total. $82,000. She tried to connect that number to the conversations she remembered. Daniel telling her they could not afford to repair the roof. Daniel asking her to reduce her retirement contributions. Daniel saying they needed to be realistic about how much they could save for Lily's education. All those careful little sacrifices had gone in one direction. Sarah had been cutting back at home while Daniel quietly financed another life. A single affair could be blamed on weakness. $82,000 required planning. It required bank accounts, schedules, receipts, and repeated decisions. Most of all, it required Daniel to believe Sarah would keep trusting his explanations. Elaine still refused to jump ahead of the evidence. A child's name on an insurance record did not prove Daniel was the father. Paying someone's rent did not automatically prove a second family. They needed more than suspicion. Then Marcus found a payment with a short note attached. Paternity testing balance. Sarah read those 3 words and felt something inside her go still. Not break. Not yet. Just stop. The possibility of another child was painful enough. But the payment suggested Daniel had already asked the same question Sarah was asking now. He had ordered a test. He had received an answer. And instead of telling his wife, he had built a financial system around keeping that answer hidden. While Sarah had been sitting in therapy, being told to move forward. Daniel had been arranging payments behind her back. That was the part she could not get past. He had known enough to prepare. Known enough to create an LLC. Known enough to separate the money. Known enough to lie with confidence. Elaine warned Sarah that the financial case would not be Daniel's only strategy. He might ask for 50-50 custody of Lily. Sarah looked at her. Daniel loved Lily, but he had never managed half of her daily life. He did not know her school schedule without asking. He forgot medical appointments. He changed weekend plans whenever work became inconvenient. Elaine explained that an equal custody request was not always driven by parenting. Sometimes it affected child support. Sometimes it helped the parent appear involved and stable. And sometimes it gave a dishonest spouse a way to describe the other parent as emotional, controlling, or vindictive. Daniel had already spent years teaching Sarah to doubt her reactions. It would not be difficult for him to try the same thing in court. So Sarah began collecting a different kind of evidence. She went back through 3 years of calendars, school meetings, dental visits, doctor appointments, practice schedules, exam dates, pickup arrangements, parent conferences. She saved emails from teachers and activity coordinators. She gathered messages where Daniel canceled weekends, arrived late, or asked Sarah for information about events he claimed to be involved in. What time is Lily's practice? What is the doctor's name again? Is the school meeting this Thursday or next? Sarah had never written those details down because she expected a custody fight. She kept them because somebody had to remember. That was the strange thing about invisible work. Daniel had treated it as if it required no effort. Now the record of that work showed exactly who had been raising their daughter day after day. The divorce papers were delivered through Daniel's attorney's office. Sarah did not send anyone to embarrass him at work. She did not post the hotel bill online. She did not call his colleagues. She wanted protection, not a performance. Daniel called her within an hour. She let the first call go to voicemail. His voice sounded frightened. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said the hotel receipt did not tell the full story. He asked her not to make permanent decisions while she was upset. The second message sounded wounded. He reminded her of their history, their home, everything they had survived together. By the third message, the fear had turned into anger. Daniel said she was throwing away 23 years over one incomplete bill. He said a wife should speak to her husband before handing their marriage to attorneys. Sarah listened without answering. She had spent years speaking to him. The problem was never that Daniel had not been given a chance to explain. The problem was that every explanation had been designed to protect the next lie. Elaine handled all questions involving the accounts, the house, and the business. Daniel changed his approach almost daily. First, he apologized. Then he blamed the pressure of work. After that, he said Sarah had never truly allowed their marriage to heal. Finally, he announced that he would seek equal custody of Lily. The message he left was colder than the others. You don't get to take my daughter because you're angry about the past. Sarah played it twice. The hotel charge was 2 weeks old. The apartment payments were current. The business account was still active. Daniel was calling it the past because that made Sarah's anger sound unreasonable. But none of it was over. 6 days before mediation, Elaine called Sarah into her office. The DNA report had arrived. Daniel was Noah's biological father. The test had not been performed recently. It was more than 2 years old. Daniel had known for most of the time he and Sarah were supposedly rebuilding their marriage. He had also signed a private support agreement with Rebecca. There was no formal court order, no public filing, no official calculation of Daniel's income. The arrangement had been kept quiet by design. He did not want Sarah to learn about Noah. He did not want his consulting income examined. And he did not want a child support order appearing anywhere near the records of his marriage. Then Elaine showed Sarah the dates. Noah had been conceived while Sarah and Daniel were attending couples therapy. Only months after Daniel promised, he had ended all contact with Rebecca. While Sarah sat beside him discussing trust, Daniel was helping Rebecca rent an apartment. While Sarah tried to forgive, he was setting up the consulting company. While Daniel complained about the cost of Lily's future, he was preparing financially for another child. He had not been repairing their marriage. He had been learning how to maintain two households without letting either woman see the whole picture. With Sarah, Daniel was the remorseful husband. He spoke about healing. He worried aloud about money. He said the family had to cut back. With Rebecca, he paid rent and daycare. He visited during business trips. He attended Noah's birthday. He promised he would deal with his marriage when the time was right. Rebecca had known Daniel was married. Sarah did not excuse that, but Daniel had told Rebecca a different version of the truth. He said Sarah knew about Noah. He claimed the marriage was over in every way except on paper. He said he and Sarah remained in the same house only for Lily, and that the divorce had already been discussed. Rebecca believed she was waiting for a marriage to end. Sarah believed she was saving one. Daniel was the only person who knew both stories were false. When Rebecca learned he was asking for equal custody while denying part of his income, she stopped cooperating with him. She turned over the private support agreement. She provided records of the rent and daycare payments. She gave Elaine a copy of the DNA report. And she shared a message Daniel had sent about keeping the money away from the household account so Sarah would not ask questions. That message removed the last excuse. Daniel had not hidden the payments because he was confused. He had hidden them because he knew exactly what they meant. Sarah agreed to meet him once at Elaine's office. No restaurant, no family home, no private place where Daniel could raise his voice and later describe the conversation differently. They sat across from one another in a conference room. Daniel looked older than he had a month earlier. He began by saying he had always planned to tell her. Not then, not soon, but someday, when the time was right. He said Noah was innocent and should not suffer because of adult mistakes. Sarah agreed. Noah is innocent. Lily is innocent. The only person in this room who had all the information was you. Daniel looked down at the table. Then he did what he had done for years. He tried to make Sarah responsible for the distance between them. He said she had never truly forgiven him. He said her suspicion had made the marriage cold. He suggested that if she had moved forward after the first affair, maybe things would not have become so complicated. Sarah placed the DNA report beside the hotel receipt. I gave you a second chance, Daniel. You used it to build a second family with our money. For once, Daniel did not have an immediate answer. Then he said they could still settle everything privately. Sarah almost smiled, though there was nothing funny in the room. We tried private. Private is where you hid everything. That was the end of the conversation. Sarah went home and made dinner for Lily. She did not explain the affair in detail. She did not tell her daughter about the money, the hotel, or the DNA report. She told Lily only what a child needed to know. The divorce was not her fault. Both parents loved her. She did not have to choose sides. Daniel was preparing to use custody as leverage. Sarah was making sure Lily never carried the weight of his choices. The crib had led to the child. The child had led to the money. And the money had exposed the years Daniel spent living two separate lives. He left the meeting believing the DNA report was the worst thing Sarah had against him. It was not. The custody calendar and the business records were waiting for him in court. Daniel walked into the custody hearing with a version of himself he hoped the court would accept. In that version, he had always been an involved father. He said Sarah had become emotional after learning about the affair. He said Lily needed equal time with both parents. He said his travel schedule could be adjusted. And he said Sarah was trying to use their daughter to punish him. Sarah sat beside Elaine and listened. She did not interrupt. She did not shake her head. She had spent too many years trying to win arguments with a man who could turn every question into a flaw in her character. This time, she let the records speak. Elaine began with the family calendar. 3 years of school meetings, doctor appointments, dental visits, parent conferences, practices, exams, pickup schedules, canceled weekends. Then came the emails. Messages from teachers addressed to Sarah. Reminders from coaches answered by Sarah. Medical forms signed by Sarah. There were also messages from Daniel. What time is Lily's practice? Who is her doctor again? Is the school meeting this week or next? When does she need to be picked up? None of those messages looked dramatic on their own. Together, they told the truth. Sarah had managed the daily life of their daughter. She knew when Lily had a test, when she needed medication, and when something was wrong before Lily said a word. Daniel loved his daughter. Sarah never denied that. But he had been absent more often than he admitted. His work trips took him away for nights at a time. He canceled weekends when business became inconvenient. Some of the trips he called work matched the dates he had been near Rebecca's apartment. Daniel told the court he was an equal parent. The calendar showed a different story. Sarah was careful about what she asked for. She did not try to cut Daniel out of Lily's life. She proposed a clear schedule built around Lily's school, her activities, and Daniel's real availability. It gave him meaningful time with his daughter. It simply did not pretend that he had been doing half the work all along. That mattered. Sarah was not asking the court to punish Daniel. She was asking the court to protect stability. When Elaine asked Daniel how he planned to manage equal custody while continuing to travel, he said his company would make adjustments. She asked whether he had a new schedule. He did not. She asked whether his employer had agreed in writing. It had not. She asked who would care for Lily on the nights he was away. Daniel said he would figure that out. For years, Sarah had been the person who figured things out. Now Daniel wanted credit for a plan that did not exist. Then Marcus Bell took his place and began explaining the money. There was nothing emotional in the way he spoke. That made it harder for Daniel to dismiss. Marcus explained that Whitmore Strategic Consulting was not an inactive company, as Daniel had claimed. The account showed regular deposits. Bonus payments had been directed there. Consulting income had passed through it. Personal expenses had been labeled as business costs. Marcus went through the records, one category at a time. Rent for Rebecca's apartment. Daycare payments. Insurance for Noah. Hotel rooms. Children's supplies. Direct transfers. More than $82,000 in marital funds had been used outside the marriage. Some of that money came from bonuses Daniel told Sarah he had never received. Some came from income that had never appeared in the family budget. Some should have gone toward Lily's college savings. And part of Daniel's plan had depended on Sarah signing a home equity loan. The same loan he claimed they needed to repair the roof. Daniel listened with his jaw tight. When it was his turn to respond, he said supporting Noah was his moral responsibility. On that point, Elaine did not disagree. Noah was Daniel's son. The child deserved support. The child had done nothing wrong. Elaine made sure the court understood that Sarah was not objecting to Daniel caring for him. The issue was how he had done it. Daniel concealed income. He used marital funds without telling Sarah. He understated the value of the LLC. He tried to place new debt on the family home while keeping money in a private business account. He asked for equal custody of Lily while claiming he earned less than the records showed. He wanted to be seen as fully available when custody might reduce child support. At the same time, he wanted to appear financially limited when the assets were divided. Both stories served Daniel. They simply could not both be true. For years, Daniel had survived by separating facts. One explanation for Sarah, another for Rebecca, a third for the therapist, a fourth for the bank. In court, the pieces were finally placed on the same table. And once they were together, the pattern was impossible to miss. The exact legal result depended on the laws in their state, but the records Daniel tried to keep private became part of the final decision. Whitmore Strategic Consulting and its accounts were included in the marital estate. Daniel's real income was used when child support was calculated. That included consulting revenue and bonuses he had previously kept outside the household budget. Sarah received an offset for part of the marital money Daniel had spent without her knowledge. He was ordered to provide complete records for the business account, his bonuses, and the related expenses, because his original disclosures had been incomplete. Daniel was assigned part of Sarah's attorney fees and the cost of the forensic accountant. Sarah was allowed to remain in the family home until Lily finished the school year. She became Lily's primary residential parent. Daniel received a parenting schedule based on the time he could actually provide, not the amount of time that looked best on paper. Daniel did not lose everything. This was not that kind of story. He still had his job. He remained the father of 2 children. He still had responsibilities to both of them, and both children deserved more than the consequences of his dishonesty. But Daniel lost something he had depended on for years. He lost control of the story. Rebecca now knew he had lied to her about Sarah. Sarah no longer protected his reputation with family and friends. And Lily was old enough to see the difference between saying you're present and actually being there. The consequences were not loud. There was no dramatic collapse outside the courthouse. No one applauded. No one needed to. The consequences arrived in documents. Corrected income, divided assets, support obligations, legal fees. A parenting calendar Daniel could no longer use as a bargaining tool. For a man who had spent years moving parts of his life into separate boxes, there was a certain justice in seeing every box opened at once. At the end of the hearing, Daniel looked toward Sarah. For a moment, it seemed as if he expected something from her. Anger, victory, maybe one more argument. Sarah gave him nothing. She gathered the folders in front of her and followed Elaine into the hallway. The door closed behind them. Elaine asked if she was all right. Sarah stood there for a few seconds before answering. Not yet. But for the first time, I know what is true. That was enough for that day. The receipt had raised the first question. The crib charge had exposed the lie. But the calendars, the bank statements, and the business records gave the court something stronger than suspicion. They gave it a pattern. Sarah had secured the right to leave without losing the home, her savings, or the stability Lily depended on. Learning how to live without waiting for the next lie took longer. Sarah remained in the family house until Lily completed the school year. Those final months were strange. The rooms looked the same, but the meaning of them had changed. The kitchen still held years of family dinners. The hallway still carried marks from when Lily was measured against the wall as she grew. The living room had hosted birthdays, holidays, apologies, and promises Sarah once believed would last. She did not hate the house. That would have been easier. She simply understood that it could no longer be home. After the school year ended, Sarah agreed to sell it under the terms of the settlement. She moved into a smaller townhouse across town. The dining area was narrow. The yard was little more than a patch of grass. There was no spare room filled with furniture nobody used. But the place was hers. More importantly, the life inside it was honest. There were no mystery accounts, no business trips she was afraid to question, no bills that made her hand pause before opening them. For the first time in years, Sarah knew where the money went. Lily had a clear schedule with Daniel. Sarah never used the affair to poison that relationship. She did not turn every late pickup into a speech about his failures. She did not ask Lily to report what happened at his home. She answered her daughter's questions as honestly as she could without making her responsible for adult choices. Lily was allowed to love her father. She was also allowed to see him clearly. Daniel began learning something the custody hearing could not teach him. Fatherhood was not proven by asking for 50% of the calendar. It was proven by showing up, on time, prepared, without asking Sarah to remember everything for him. At first, Daniel missed a few details. He forgot a school form. He arrived late to an appointment. He called Sarah to ask questions he should already have known. She answered when Lily's needs required it. But she no longer stepped in to make him look more capable than he was. If Daniel wanted a relationship with his daughter, he would have to build it himself. Sarah began rebuilding too. She restored the retirement contributions she had reduced when Daniel claimed the family was struggling. She opened a separate college savings account for Lily. At work, Sarah was given more responsibility. Then came a promotion. Her supervisor told her she had always been dependable, but over the past year she seemed more focused and more confident. Sarah did not explain that she was no longer spending half her energy managing someone else's lies. She simply accepted the position. She started seeing old friends again. At first, the dinners felt awkward. Sarah had spent years turning down invitations because Daniel was traveling, because Lily needed something, or because she did not want anyone to ask whether her marriage was all right. Now she allowed herself to stay out for coffee, to laugh, to talk about ordinary things. She learned that peace was not always dramatic. Sometimes it was sitting in a quiet kitchen on a Sunday morning and knowing nobody was asking her to doubt what she could plainly see. A few months after the divorce was finalized, Daniel asked to meet. He said there were things he wanted to say without lawyers in the room. Sarah agreed to meet him in a public place. Not because she owed him another conversation, because she wanted to know whether hearing his voice could still disturb the life she had built. Daniel looked tired. The confidence he carried during their marriage had softened into something closer to regret. He told Sarah that his new life was not what he had expected. He said everything had become complicated. Rebecca no longer trusted him. His relationship with Lily felt distant. He was paying for 2 households in ways he could no longer hide or control. Then he reminded Sarah that they had shared more than 20 years. He talked about the early years, the first house, Lily's birth, the life they had built before everything went wrong. He asked whether Sarah could look at what happened as one complicated mistake, not the ending of the entire history. Sarah listened. There had been a time when those words might have worked. She might have remembered the man he had been and mistaken that memory for the man sitting across from her. But Sarah had learned the difference between regret and accountability. Daniel regretted the life he lost. That did not mean he had become honest about how he destroyed it. The affair was a betrayal. The child was innocent. The years of decisions in between were not a mistake. Daniel looked as if he wanted to argue. Sarah did not give him the chance. She stood, said goodbye, and walked toward the parking lot. Lily was waiting in the car. Sarah got in and closed the door. She did not look back. Sarah did not win because Daniel was unhappy. She did not win because Rebecca stopped believing him. She did not win because the court found the money or rejected his custody strategy. Those were consequences. Her victory was quieter. She no longer woke up wondering whether she had imagined the signs. She no longer needed Daniel's permission to trust the evidence in front of her. She no longer reduced her future so he could finance a lie. And she no longer confused patience with an obligation to endure. There is nothing weak about giving someone a second chance, but a second chance is not permission for a second betrayal. Sometimes peace comes from repairing what was broken. And sometimes it comes from accepting that you were the only person trying to repair it. Sarah once believed leaving Daniel meant losing her family. In the end, leaving was how she protected what remained of it. It was how she protected Lily. It was how she protected her future. And after years of being told to doubt herself, it was how she finally stopped losing Sarah. Subscribe for more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, financial consequences, and the quiet moments when ordinary people take their power back.